Welcome to School's Out 80's Comedy Story Time.
Hey everybody, welcome to School's Out 80's Comedy Story Time. Today I have a very special guest coming to you all the way from New York City, Jeffrey Gurian. Jeffrey, go ahead and say hello to my listening audience.
Hey everybody, what's up? It's Jeffrey, and I'm here in New York City. Thank you, John. Thanks for having me on with you.
Oh, absolutely, man. Super excited to have you, Jeffrey. I need to tell some folks all about you. We're going to get into some really funny stories from Jeffrey's career, but I want you guys to know that Jeffrey is considered the Renaissance man. He's been involved in so many things. You're going to be amazed when you hear about his background. Jeffrey is not only a comedy writer, a performer, director, author, producer, radio personality. He's also a doctor, and not necessarily in that order. So first and foremost, I did some research, and I know that you were a dental cosmetic dentist by day and a comedy writer by night. In the 80s, can you name two specific comedians that you worked with and maybe some funny stories around those two comedians?
Yeah, well, in 1980, I wrote for the biggest star I had ever worked with. I got my start in the after Saturday Night Live came out, and they were out for about a year. I got my start by going up there with some films that I was making on my own, little crazy videos that, like false news items, like several men were arrested for smearing cream cheese on the ankles of elderly women who wore their stockings rolled down like bagels. I don't know if you ever saw the old women who wear their stockings rolled down. It looked like bagels to me. Coming from New York, bagels and cream cheese, they go together. So I got my dear grandmother, who had a wonderful sense of humor. She made believe she had a Jewish accent, and she rolled down her stockings, and I was so sick, I put cream cheese on my own grandmother's ankles. And you can see this on the internet. It's on my Comedy Matters TV YouTube channel. And she said, in the Jewish religion, we have two kinds of stockings, one for milk and one for meat. And she goes, and this crazy man, he smeared cream cheese on my meat stockings, and I can't get it off. And I zoom in with the camera. I had a little Super 8 camera in those days, and I was filming everything myself. I didn't know anything about lighting or filming. I just had a camera, and I was out on the street doing these crazy films. I did another one that was The Masters of Disguise, and it was about master criminals who disguise themselves as inanimate objects. So it starts with two men disguised as coats rob a hat store. They come in, folded over the arms of two other men, and they say, just act natural like we're your coats and nobody will get hurt. And so police do composite drawings of the perpetrators, and it's two coats, and that I did many crimes, like two men disguised as a pair of eyeglasses rob a local optometrist. They come in on the face of another man who swears he had no part in the whole thing. And then I would do an interview with the victim of the crime, and he said something like, I don't know what's going on. He goes, I go into this optometrist to have my eyeglasses adjusted. Out of nowhere, another pair of glasses jumps onto my face and says, just act natural like wear your glasses and nobody will get hurt. What's this city coming to? Right? So I do these films, and I bring them up to Saturday Night Live. In those days, I was driving what could only be described as a pimp mobile. It was a Mandarin orange Eldorado, a Cadillac Eldorado that had been made for one of the Isley brothers.
Oh, wow.
And I bought it, and I put a Rolls Royce grill on it, like the pimps drove in New York City, with big white wall tires and a cabriolet roof. straps on the back, no, and it had doctor's plates on it. So when I would drive through Manhattan, cops would check out the car, hookers would look, drug dealers, because nobody like me ever drove a car like that. And I drove up to Saturday Night Live, and I said, I threw the doorman a few bucks, and I said, watch my car. Lorne Michaels is expecting me. Lorne Michaels was the producer, the creator of Saturday Night Live. He had no idea who I was. He was not expecting me, but I had a lot of nerve in those days. I was just a kid.
Right.
And, I even had a CB radio that was in the shape of a telephone. You're from Texas. You got to know about CB radios, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, man.
Breaker 19, right? So,
Sure.
But my CB radio was in the shape of a telephone. So I drive up in this orange Cadillac with a Rolls Royce grill. I'm on the phone, a phony phone, right? And I say, Lorne Michaels is expecting me. They watch my car. I go in and I sneak past the security.
Oh, love it.
And I get up to Saturday Night Live, and Alan Zweibel is there. He's playing handball on the wall with a guy named Neil Levy, who is a producer of Saturday Night Live. And he happened to be related to Lorne Michaels. So I introduce myself, and I tell him I make these films, and he agrees to watch them. And he goes, this is wild. I never saw anything like this. And he does one of the nicest things. He calls his manager for me.
Yeah.
He could have just given me the number or said something, but he actually made the phone call and said, you got to meet this guy, Jeffrey Gurian. He's doing very interesting things. So I went up to meet his manager, who was a man named David Jonas. And in those days, he was managing Freddie Prinze. That was his biggest star. And, as a matter of fact, he was influential in getting Freddie Prinze the show Chico and the Man.
Oh, sure.
So he tried to talk me out of it. He goes, you're a doctor. What do you need this for? This is crazy. There's a crazy business. And I said, yeah, but I can't help it. I love comedy since I'm a kid, and I want to break into the comedy world. And so he groomed me kind of. It took me about a year to learn how to write jokes because I was thinking cream cheese on the ankles. I was thinking about sketches. And to write a joke is a very singular art form. It takes a long time to learn how to do it properly. So I started writing for his comedians. He was managing a whole group of them. The most famous was, as I said, Freddie Prinze Sr.
Okay.
And he would tell me stories about Freddie, and every week I would go to his office. On Wednesday, my dental office was closed. So that was my show business day. And I was married, and my wife understood. I think she thought that I was going to give it up at some point, that it was just like a hobby for me.
Right.
Every Wednesday, I would leave our beautiful home in the suburbs, and I would drive to Manhattan to try to break into show business and meet people. And so today, people say, how do you know everybody in the comedy world? And they all know you. It's because it took a lot of hard work for many, many years of networking to meet all the people that I know in comedy. They actually did a documentary this past year after I recovered from COVID double pneumonia. A documentary came out about my life, and it's called Who the F is Jeffrey Gurian? I don't know if there's cursing on your show or not, so I'm not going to say it, but it's called Who the F is Jeffrey Gurian?
I love it.
It's on, you can look it up, and it's me with everybody in comedy. And so in 1980, I got to write for Rodney Dangerfield. And he was such a huge star, and he was the first really big star that I wrote for. And he was doing my jokes on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And that kind of got my name out there. After I wrote for Rodney, people started to know because he was such a huge star, and he was still performing at his club in Manhattan. His club opened in 1969 with his partner, Tony Bavacqua, was a drummer. And Rodney was doing jokes in Greenwich Village because in those days, there was no comedy clubs.
Sure.
In 1963, a man named Bud Friedman opened what became the very first comedy club in the world called the Improv. Yep. But it didn't start out as a comedy club. It started out, it was like singers came, Broadway people, when they got out of their show, they would come there and hang out, and they'd get up on stage and they'd do a song or two, and then comedians would come by. Billy Crystal was there, and Robert Klein and David Brenner, you know, they would come in. And so Bud noticed that after about a year or so, that people were coming more for the comedy than for the singing.
Yeah.
And he turned it into strictly a comedy club. And so that was 1963. It wasn't until 1972 that a man named Rick Newman opened up a place called Catch a Rising Star, which no longer exists in New York. And then in 1976, the third comedy club came along called the Comic Strip. And that's the club that I wrote the book about. Chris Rock wrote the introduction to the book, and it was called Make 'em Laugh.
Yep.
And the owner of the club was a man named Richie Tinkin, who just passed away a couple of months ago. And he was a very, very dear friend of mine. We wrote the book together. It took 4 years for me to write that book because I interviewed everybody that came out of that club. And that club is still open. I was just there last night. The club is open to this day. Jerry Seinfeld spent the first 4 years of his career there. And it opened on June 1st of 1976. And on June 17th, Jerry Seinfeld came in to audition. And in those days, they would rate you. You had to fill out a form. And his audition slip is in my book, a copy of it. And they said he was good and that they should invite him back on Monday. And so I interviewed everybody, you know, Billy Crystal, who was the first comedian on stage that night, and Ray Romano and Colin Quinn and Susie Essman from Curb Your Enthusiasm and Lisa Lampanelli, Jim Gaffigan. They're all in the book. They're all friends of mine, and they all sat down with me to give me in-depth interviews of how they started in comedy and how they wound up at the Comic Strip and how much that club helped them in their career. So every year in July, I go up to the Just for Laughs Festival, which is the biggest comedy festival in the world. It's in Montreal. Mm-hmm. And I kicked off the book. My first 3 interviews were done in Montreal. Larry Miller, George Wallace, who is Jerry Seinfeld's best friend, and Paul Provenza were up there. Those are my first 3 interviews. And then I went out and did everybody else. And it literally took 4 years. It took 3 years to do all the interviews and then a whole year to do the editing because I had written more than 500 pages and the publisher just needed about 250. So I had to cut out all those pages, which was almost impossible. How do you cut out, you know, material from Seinfeld and Louis Black and all those big stars? You know, it was really a grueling process. But the book came out called Make 'em Laugh, and then we did a second version a few years ago. The publisher came back to me and wanted to do an updated version, and the updated version is called Laughing Legends. And again, it's updated because when I did the first book, like for instance, I interviewed Colin Jost, who is the head writer in Saturday Night Live now, and he does Weekend Update with Michael Che. But in those days, he was just performing comedy. So I wanted to write that now he's the head writer of Saturday Night Live. He just married Scarlett Johansson, you know. Wow. And then Jordan Rock, who's Chris Rock's baby brother. So at the time, he and I were hosting the late night show at the Comic Strip. They had never had hosts before, but Richie thought that we were really funny. So he said, Jeffrey, you host Sunday and Monday night, and Jordan will host Tuesday and Wednesday night. And Jordan is now a pretty big star. He starred on Judd Apatow's show Love, and he's done a bunch of movies, and he's done a whole bunch of things. As a matter of fact, I was with him last night too. He was performing at the Comic Strip. And it's a club that changed comedy history, really. So many big stars came out of that one club. And the fact that it's still open, unfortunately, Dangerfields went out of business this past year because of the COVID epidemic. And Catch a Rising Star has not been in New York for a long time. It's a franchise. And the owner of the franchise, Susie Yengo, came to my show. I do a monthly comedy show at a very famous place in New York called the Cutting Room.
Yep.
You know Chris Noth from Sex and the City? He played Mr. Big. So he owns the Cutting Room. And so I did a show there in June, and I have one coming up in a few days on Tuesday the 17th in New York. I don't know if this is going to come out before or not, but for any of you.
Yeah, we'll probably have it out on the internet on Monday. And I'm actually, Jeffrey, trying to get some of my friends in New York to go. Max is one of them, and Sal and his group with his film are another group that I'm trying to get out to go. In fact, I challenged this cast last night to go.
Thank you very much. I have an amazing lineup of comedians, all from late night TV and movies.
Wow.
Derek Gaines is up for an Emmy. He was from The Last OG with Tracy Morgan, and he was in the movie The King of Staten Island with Pete Davidson.
Sure.
And Vlad Camano, and had his own pilot on TV. I'm having a special guest spot. Adam Ferrara is flying in from LA, and you would know him from Nurse Jackie. He was the host of Top Gear, and he was also a co-star on Rescue Me with Dennis Leary. And my lineup is sick. People are like, how'd you get all those people on one show? Mark Normand, who opens for Amy Schumer, and just on and on. I have all big stars. So I hope some of your friends will come. There's still some tickets available. It's an amazing show. So, but it all started by me writing for Rodney back in the 80s, because that's what put my name out there. And then I got to work with Joan Rivers and Richard Belzer and Gilbert Gottfried and Pat Cooper. And then I started writing for the Friars Roast through the 80s.
Sure.
The famous Friars Roast. I was the main writer for 12 years.
Wow.
So I got to work on the Chevy Chase Roast and the Donald Trump Roast. And we roasted Hugh Hefner, and I got to write on that roast. And I wrote for Bruce Willis for his roast. That's how I wrote for Jerry Lewis. The great Jerry Lewis was roasted, and I was assigned to be his writer. So I had the honor of working with him, and it was we spent 2 nights in his hotel room working on material, and I had the honor of being with him. He got a phone call. Jerry Lewis did a telethon every year for muscular dystrophy.
Sure.
And I was with him when he got a phone call that they discovered the gene that caused the Duchenne form of muscular dystrophy, and tears were rolling down his face. He was so moved by that, and it was just me and him alone to share that moment. It was really amazing. I'll never forget that. He passed away I think he passed away about a year or two ago, and the Friars Club named their building after him. That's how special he was. Milton Berle was my sponsor in the Friars Club, if you remember Milton Berle.
Sure.
Mr. Television, that was a great honor to me. Mr. Television. We used to hang out together through the 80s and beyond. And and in order to join the Friars Club, which was a private show business club,
sure,
you had to be sponsored by somebody. Well, he was the president of the Friars Club, so you couldn't do better than that. He actually found the location in New York City and gave it to the Friars Club. This gorgeous building. It's like a 5 or 6 story building on 55th Street near Park Avenue, between Park and Madison. One of the most exclusive areas, just a gorgeous club. And so I was a member there for many years. And I used to cover all the Friars Roasts. I would do all the interviews. I would write material for the performers. It was really, truly an amazing time for me. So that's a very long answer to your question.
No, that's awesome. So here's something that a lot of people that are going to be listening probably don't know about you that to me makes you super unique. And it's that the different types of people that you've written jokes for, because you've written jokes for, and this isn't all of them, of course, Jeffrey, but Rodney Dangerfield, Robin Williams, Joan Rivers, Andrew Dice Clay. And I sit there and I think about that, and I can't think of a more diverse group of comedians to write jokes for.
Mhm.
You take Rodney Dangerfield, who kind of had a almost a formula type of process. You know, I get no respect, I get no respect. You take Robin Williams, and I've studied Robin Williams indefinitely because he intrigues me, because I've never seen anybody quite like him except maybe Jonathan Winters. But Robin Williams was so spontaneous, and it was like shooting him out of a cannon, going 1,000 miles a minute, and just joke after joke after joke. And one thing that I take away from with Robin Williams, all the times he's been on stage, most of us know absolutely nothing about him.
Well, to tell you the truth, I only had the opportunity to write for Robin one time for a Friars Roast.
Yeah.
I had met him through Jack Rollins, his manager. Jack Rollins was managing Woody Allen, Robin Williams, and Billy Crystal. He had the biggest stars in the world.
Wow.
And Jack was a great supporter of mine, who actually, he sent me up to Saturday Night Live some years later for me to meet with Herb Sargent, who was their head writer for many, many years. But Jack had the idea that he wanted to do a sitcom based on my story. He thought it was fascinating that I was a dentist who was writing for big stars.
Yeah.
Because I knew that in order for people to take me seriously, I had to write for very famous people. If I was writing for comedians that no one ever heard of, I would just look like a novelty. Like Ed Sullivan used to have like a knife thrower, a plate spinner. I didn't want to look like a novelty. I wanted to be taken seriously. So I knew I had to write for very big stars, which is not easy to do. So Jack Rollins wanted Billy Crystal to play me. He thought it would be a great idea to have a sitcom about a dentist who wanted to be in show business. He thought it was hilarious. And so that's how I met Billy Crystal. He introduced us in his office, and he introduced me to Robin Williams. And this was around that time, around the 1980s. You know, it was a long time ago, before they were as famous as they became.
Yeah.
And I had met Woody Allen on my own when I was still in dental school. So I got to meet them. And Jack thought that that was amazing, that Woody Allen invited me to come back. I contrived a way to meet him so that I could show him my material, because I was a kid and I had no fear in those days of going out to meet people that I wanted to meet. There were only 3 people. When I was a kid, I only wanted to meet 3 people in the world: Woody Allen, Salvador Dali, and the Beach Boys. And I met them all. I made that happen, you know? So Woody Allen was so kind that he invited me backstage to sit with him and show him my writing.
Sure.
And he said to me, you know, my dream was that he would say, "Jeffrey, you're amazing and we should do movies together." But that's not what happened. He read all my stuff, and he said to me, "It's very visual and you should really think of making a film out of it." And it took me some years, but these films are also on the internet. It was called the Men Who series, and they were inspired. I was inspired to do them after meeting with Woody, and it was about men who do very unusual things, like men who take a pitchfork to the movies. Coming from your state, I'm sure you know what a pitchfork is. You don't see them. You don't see them in New York. But in order to get into the movies, there was a sign: "Men with farm implements get in free." And this guy's standing online with a pitchfork. Or men who enjoy Latin dancing with tools. I had a guy who did the tango with a wrench. That was like amazing. And I'll tell you who's in these films. Peter Dinklage, the star of Game of Thrones, is in one of my films. You can see it if you look up the Men Who series on my Comedy Matters TV YouTube channel. You go to youtube.com/Comedy Matters TV and look up the Men Who series, and you'll see Peter Dinklage in a film called Men Who Dance Where They're Not Supposed to. Yeah. And it's, you know, in New York, there's a lot of parking restrictions. There are signs, no parking Tuesday or Thursday or anything like that. I had my artist make up a sign that said no dancing Tuesday and Thursday or any other time. And Peter Dinklage gets arrested for dancing in a no dancing zone where you're not allowed to dance. And it's priceless. Whoever thought he'd go on to become one of the biggest stars in the world? But
You never know, yeah.
you know, I met him through Ethan Hawke. There was a theater group in New York called the Naked Angels. They're still around. They're still very vital. But in those days, it was Sarah Jessica Parker, Matthew Broderick, Ethan Hawke was involved. He used to come to their shows. Fisher Stevens, people that became huge stars. And in the early days, I was one of the writers who would come every week and bring them stuff that I wrote, and they would read it to see how people liked it. And that's how I met Peter Dinklage at Naked Angels. And we became friends, and I was doing these films, and I said, would you be part of it? And he said, yes. And sometimes that's all it takes. You know, you ask somebody politely to be part of your project. He knew me because Ethan Hawke liked the stuff that I was writing. And actually, I wrote a play called A Punch in the Face. And I started reading it at the Naked Angels, and it was dedicated to Chuck Zito. If you know who Chuck Zito is.
No.
If you ever saw on HBO, there was a show called Oz, a prison show.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
Chuck Zito was the head of the Italian gang in prison. He's a Hell's Angel. He was the president of the Hell's Angels in real life.
Yeah.
And when I met him, he was bodyguarding Charlie Sheen.
Wow.
He's a boxer and a martial artist and a Hell's Angel. Not the kind of guy you ever want to mess with, believe me. And so when I met him, he was Charlie Sheen's bodyguard. And we became friends. As a matter of fact, I just finished reading his book, and I wrote to him. He has a book called Street Justice.
Oh, okay.
And it's a fantastic book. But Chuck went on to become a huge star. And he's been a friend of mine for many years. And so I wrote this play that Ethan Hawke read in the early days, and he encouraged me. He said, you're a very good writer. And I dedicated the play to Chuck Zito, and he came to the opening with his family and some of the people from The Sopranos.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was really, really pretty amazing. So I'm still in touch with Chuck. I wrote to him last week to tell him how much I enjoyed his book. And I invited him to my comedy show, but he said he's in the midst of, they're doing a documentary about his life. Because it's very rare to be a Hell's Angel and accomplish so many other things besides. Not just the Hell's Angel, but he was the president of the Hell's Angels and would never take off. He wore his Hell's Angels jacket wherever he went.
Yeah.
And they tried to get him to take it off, but he wouldn't take it off no matter what. Now he's another guy who stands up for what he believes in.
Yeah.
You know, never smoked, never drank, never did drugs. Just like, you know, a very special guy. And I'm very proud that he's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And so I wrote that play, and I did it in his honor, called A Punch in the Face. Because that's what he would give people if they didn't respect him, you know?
You bet. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome.
So I had a very interesting time through the 80s and 90s and so on, up to the present day. You know, there's a man named Ron Bennington on Sirius XM radio. He's a huge radio star. And I was a regular on his show for 2 years. And I brought on a lot of big stars that were my friends and my guests, like Trevor Noah and D.L. Hughley, Lisa Lampanelli, Susie Essman. They all came on as my guests. And he said that I'm the only person he knows that was connected to the greats of yesteryear, like Milton Berle and Henny Youngman and Sid Caesar and all those guys.
Yeah.
And is friendly with all the comedians from today, like Nick Kroll and John Mulaney. They had me open their show for them on Broadway, the Oh Hello show. And they made me a special jacket. Do you know who Curtis Sliwa is at the Guardian Angels?
No, I don't actually. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, 40 years ago, a man named Curtis Sliwa formed the Guardian Angels. They're crime fighters. They wear red berets and they wear red satin jackets that say Guardian Angels. And he's actually running for mayor of New York City right now. He's running for the mayor on a crime platform,
Oh,
anti-crime, because there's so much crime in New York City right now that it's just horrible. I don't think Texas would ever stand for it. In New York City, you're allowed to be a victim, but you're not allowed to protect yourself.
yeah,
So
that's
you're
bad.
not allowed to have any means of protection, but you're allowed to be a victim. So people in the city are being assaulted. It's just terrible. And I'm hoping that Curtis Lewa can win
Yeah.
for the election because we really need him. So back to the comedy thing, Nick Kroll and John Mulaney made me a jacket, not knowing that I was very good friends with Curtis Lewa. I used to be his dentist.
Oh, okay.
And he used to come to me when he'd get beat up because he would fight these guys in the street. He would attack criminals. He trained these inner city kids in martial arts, and they would patrol the streets, and they would call the police. They would capture criminals. They actually turned things around. In the 1980s, New York was in very bad shape, and there were certain areas of New York that were threatened by crime, and he cleaned up the crime. And in those days, the police were not in favor of the guardian angels because it made them look bad.
Sure.
But when Rudy Giuliani became the mayor, he created a link. He appreciated the guardian angels, and they became very prominent. And they're all over the world now. I think they're in 130 countries. Curtis did an amazing thing. So anyway,
Sure.
Nick Kroll and John Mulaney made me a jacket, an exact replica of the guardian angels, but mine said Gurian angels.
Okay.
And they got two models, and they made them Gurian Angels T-shirts. And they had me open their Broadway show for them. On opening night, I was on the red carpet with them. And they had this hit Broadway show called Oh Hello. And we did it up in Montreal at the Just for Laughs Festival.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a crazy thing that they do. It's called Too Much Tuna, where they invite people into a diner, and as a prank, they give them a tuna sandwich that's about this big. And I am the very first person to be pranked with too much tuna. You can see that also. Everything that I'm telling you is on the internet. If you look up Too Much Tuna Gurian, my video will come up. And it went viral. It's got well over 1 million views.
That's
And
awesome.
so that's my thing, that I'm the too much tuna guy. I'm the very first person. So when we did it in Montreal, they had me give the tuna sandwich to Judd Apatow, who's the king of Hollywood when it comes to comedy films. You know, he does it.
Yeah.
Every big comedy film is Judd Apatow. He just did The King of Staten Island. He produced that. He produced Amy Schumer's movies. He did like 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Yep.
He does amazing comedy films. So, and he's a friend. He brought me in to do an episode of Crashing on HBO, which is a show that he produced. So it's been a wild ride, John. It's been very interesting for me, to be able to do all these things and have a chance to work with my idols, not only be friends with them, but also to perform with them. It's been very exciting. And so then I was honored with this documentary after I survived COVID.
Yeah.
It was a rough year last year with COVID, man. I'll tell you.
Yeah, man.
I had COVID double pneumonia.
Wow.
Yeah, I got it.
No idea.
I got it in March when it first came out.
Yeah.
As you could tell, I like to be the first at everything. I didn't want to wait. I went right out and got it. I had COVID double pneumonia. Single pneumonia wasn't good enough for me. I had double pneumonia.
Right.
And, I was sick for 2 months. But when they took me to the hospital, the first 2 days I was in isolation. But on the third day, they put me in a room with 3 other very sick men, all with the virus,
Okay.
And I was hoping they were kidding me when they told me that the man in the bed next to me was from Wuhan, China. I'm like, that can't even happen. That's only in a Woody Allen movie.
Right.
But it happened to me, I'm laying there next to patient 0.
Uh-huh.
And the guy is coughing and choking in the air with no mask on, and I'm laying right next to him, right? And when I expressed my concern to the nurse, she told me not to worry, and she pointed to a thin curtain that was hanging between us. And I thought to myself, how foolish of me to have been worried. Everyone knows if you want to protect yourself from a deadly virus, you hang a thin curtain around you, right?
With holes in it, right?
Yeah, I'm like, too bad Dr. Fauci didn't know about that. The thin curtain business would have totally blown up, you know?
Absolutely.
So it was crazy. So they kept me long enough for me to recover. After 4 days, they got an ambulance and they took me home to recover at home because New York was the epicenter of the virus at the time.
Yeah.
And they were running out of hospital rooms. They were putting people in the hallway already. It was a nightmare, John. It was
Oh, God love you. Man.
And you know what? And I had to fight to stay positive.
Yeah.
I had to use my comedy background to stay positive, because when you're in a negative space, your immune system doesn't function well. And I knew I had to stay strong to fight this thing, because people were dying all around, man. And it was you know, on my first day in the hospital, they didn't give me anything for the COVID. They were just concerned with bringing down my fever. They covered me in ice. They put ice under my arms, on my head, on my legs.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, it was not uncomfortable. It felt great. And they were concerned with raising my blood pressure because, you know, normal blood pressure is 120/80, right? My 80 had dropped to 42. So my circulatory system was collapsing. So they wanted to bring up my blood pressure. But on the second day, they gave me that hydroxychloroquine. And that thing worked, man. It started me on getting better. I had already been taking Z-Pak at home. As a doctor, I always keep antibiotics around.
Yeah, I bet.
On my third day, the virus went to my throat. And what they don't tell people, there's two kinds of pneumonias. There's a viral pneumonia and then there's a bacterial pneumonia. Antibiotics don't work on a virus. They don't work on a virus, but they do work on bacteria.
Okay.
And so a lot of people don't know that you can get a bacterial pneumonia from COVID. That's why antibiotics work. So luckily, I put myself on antibiotics, and you're supposed to stay on it for 5 days. I stayed on it for 10 days, and I was still getting sicker and sicker, but I could still breathe because the antibiotics protected my lungs.
Okay.
That was just a lucky break on my part. So when I got to the hospital, they didn't have to give me more Z-Pak, but they did start me on the hydroxychloroquine. And by the next day, they gave me a double dose in the morning and a double dose at night.
Yeah.
And by the next day, I started feeling better already.
Wow.
And I don't care what anybody's politics is, but I say this because they stopped using that drug. They politicized the drug. And I think a lot of people could have been saved. They also gave me zinc sulfate. And by the next day, I started feeling different. And my oxygen level stayed at 95 to 96%. And they said that was a miracle. They were wearing hazmat suits, you know?
Yeah. Wow, Jeffrey. Wow.
I was in isolation. Only one person at a time was allowed in my room. And I didn't know what was going to happen to me. And after 4 days, they felt I was well enough to go home. And it took me 2 months to recover.
Yeah.
After I got home, I had to take more antibiotics. I got something called pleurisy, which is an inflammation of the lining of the lungs.
Yeah.
It was very painful to breathe, but I could still breathe. And it was thanks to those medications, to the Z-Pak. Plus, you know, it sounds weird to say, about 6 years ago, I had a heart attack.
Yeah. Yeah. I read that.
Nowhere, and I've been on blood thinners ever since. And I never stopped them. They told me I could have stopped, but it was just luck, pure luck. I decided to stay on it because it wasn't really bothering me, because you can clot up. So they didn't know at the time that COVID caused blood clotting. And so I was very lucky that I started myself on Z-Pak, and I say it was lucky I had a heart attack because I stayed on the blood thinners, because I don't know if they know in Texas, but there was a Broadway star named Nick Cordero who died of COVID. He was only 41 years old. And he got a blood clot in his leg, and they had to amputate his leg first, and then he passed away a few weeks later. And I'm on the blood thinners. I'm on Z-Pak. They give me hydroxychloroquine,
Yeah.
and that's what got me through. And after I recovered, I wrote my new book on happiness.
Yeah.
Fight the fear. I don't know if I am trying to hold it so it's straight. Fight the fear.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good.
Fight the fear, overcoming obstacles that stand in your way. Because I wanted people to know that in life, we're faced with unexpected obstacles. And fear is a bully. Fear is what tells you that you'll never be successful, that you can't change careers, that you can't do what you really want to do. It stops people. Fear wants you to stay in bed all day with the covers over your head. And I used these techniques to stop stuttering. I stuttered very badly from the time I was 6 or 7 years old through my 20s and beyond. Even after I was a doctor, I was still blocking on certain words.
Yeah.
And I realized one day that I didn't stutter when I was alone. I only stuttered when I was trying to talk to somebody else, which told me that you can't have a disability based on your location. If a man has a limp, he limps in every room of his house. He can't go into a room and close the door and walk perfectly. But if I could speak well when I'm alone, then theoretically it means there's nothing wrong with me. I created it in my mind. And anything you create, you can uncreate. So I worked on myself for years. And as you can see, I no longer stutter. I created a cure for stuttering. And I now work with stutterers all over the world. I do online sessions with stutterers to teach them how not to stutter. And for anyone in your audience, in this country alone, there's more than 3 million people who stutter. And people are not telling them that they can get better. And it not only affects them, it affects their families and the people they work with. And a lot of stutterers never form relationships. They don't date because they're embarrassed because of their speech. And people don't tell them that they can get better. So I'm an example that you can get better, that you can cure it by changing your thoughts. And that's what led to my first book on happiness. I have 7 books, right? I never expected to even have one book.
Right.
But I wound up with 7 books. 5 of them are on comedy. But my last 2 books, my most recent books, are on happiness, how to achieve happiness. And this book is called Healing Your Heart by Changing Your Mind, a spiritual and humorous approach to achieving happiness. And you can see it has a bestseller status on it. Both of these books are bestsellers on Amazon.
That's awesome.
This book is about, it's called Healing Your Heart. It's not about because I had a heart attack. It's about the wounds that we accumulate from the time we're children. If you were ever bullied as a child, every time someone says something that hurts you, or breaks a promise to you, or lies to you, hurts your feelings in any way, it stays inside of you in your heart chakra. If you understand about chakras, they're energy centers that are in your body. And in your heart chakra, these wounds stay. I call them heart wounds. And they stay lodged inside of you. And they affect your self-esteem, and they affect your self-confidence, and they affect every decision you make. There's this stupid saying they teach us when we're kids: sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never harm you, which is the furthest from the truth, because all the bruises you got as a kid healed up a long time ago. But every one of us can remember something that someone said that hurt our feelings.
Sure.
And those are what I call the heart wounds. And they need to be released in order for you to achieve happiness. So I had to release my heart wounds to cure myself from stuttering. And what I've learned is that as I go through life, I have to confront everything that makes me uncomfortable. So I got through the heart attack. I was on stage 5 days after I had the heart attack.
Wow.
And it was what they call a widowmaker heart attack. I was 95% blocked in the major artery to my heart. And some genius put in a stent and they saved me. I had never been sick a day in my life. It happened in the middle of the afternoon. And the owner of the comedy club said to me, "You just had a heart attack 5 days ago. What, are you crazy?" And I'm being on stage. And I said, "You know what? It's hard to get a spot here. I don't want to lose my spot." and that's the truth. When I left the hospital, they said to me, "Try and act like this never happened."
Yeah.
It's a very weird feeling to know that you just had a heart attack that was a life-threatening heart attack.
Yeah.
And then you're supposed to go about your life and not think about it. So I stayed home a couple of days wondering, how do you act when you just had a heart attack? What are you supposed to do? And I didn't know what to do. So I said, well, I better go out and do some comedy, and I'll tell people the story of the heart attack, because I was able to make it funny. And I just kept doing what I used to do. And so this book, it's called Healing Your Heart by Changing Your Mind, because all of us need new thoughts. A lot of us, probably all of us, are holding thoughts that are not valid for us. And we tend to believe our thoughts. If you have any sort of intelligence, you think your thoughts are real. But some of your thoughts are not valid. They're swayed by what other people said to you, about you, negative things that people have said to you throughout your life that you hold on to. Even though you don't want to believe them, on some level, you hold on to them because of cellular memory. Cellular memory is very interesting. It means that everything that's happened to you since you're born is still inside of you. Every single thing you ever experienced. And unfortunately, the traumatic events are held on to deeper than the happier events. All of us remember our traumas. So I wrote this book about letting go of those things. And so I challenged myself to the point where just before the pandemic, I made myself go to Japan all by myself, because it was the scariest thing I could think of to do. I'm nervous to travel. I get lost everywhere because of my ADD. I have really bad ADD. It causes a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
I battle it. I don't let anything stop me, John.
That's awesome.
I went to Japan alone. I studied a little Japanese. I took level 1 3 times.
Okay.
I got on a plane. I flew 14 hours, which scares me. I don't like to fly, especially not 14 hours. I was the only non-Japanese person. They all fell asleep. I'm walking in the plane. I don't know what to do for 14 hours. I started studying my Japanese, and I got there, and I went on the subway every day. They have the most complicated subway system in the world. It's written about. I'm not making it up. I went on the subway every day, and I went to different cities, and I found my way around. I went to 2 comedy shows. Well, I performed in 2 comedy shows while I was there for English speaking people.
Yeah.
I conquered the subway system. I don't let fear stop me. And that's why this book, like I said, Fight the Fear, it became a bestseller on Amazon. If you look these books up, you'll see how many 5-star reviews they have.
Oh, sure.
I hope your listeners will check them out, because I call them my happiness series.
Yeah.
Because they're inspirational. They're about living your dream, making it happen. If I listened to people, I would never know anybody in comedy, because I would still be just a dentist. And then I became, for 12 years, I taught at NYU. I was a clinical professor in oral medicine and orofacial pain. And I got to work on taking away headaches from people, teaching the faculty. I'm a big believer that you can treat illness with the energy from your hands. We're all healers, and on a very interesting level.
Sure.
We've all experienced it. If you've ever been upset and someone you trusted gave you a hug and you felt better afterwards, it's because you allowed them to transfer positive energy to you, and you were open to receiving it. When I went to dental school, I'm going to hold up this picture of me in dental school. I think I showed it to you before. I was banned from dental school. They told me that my hair was too long. I had sideburns and I grew a mustache. And I was banned from school for 3 weeks. They tried to make me drop out. They told me that I would be a disgrace to the profession. And I vowed that I would never let anything stand in my way of my dreams. I graduated in the top half of my class. My mother had to get me a wig. I had to wear a flat wig with a part. And I was bullied from the first day in school until the day I graduated. I was bullied and harassed and made fun of. They took away my self-esteem, my self-confidence. They tried to ruin me as a human being. And it took me many years to gain the confidence. I was an amazing cosmetic dentist. I had a very big practice. I wound up lecturing. I would represent companies. I lectured at dental conferences. And just before the pandemic, I got an email from the dean of the dental school that I graduated from, but he wasn't the dean when I graduated.
Sure.
He's the dean for the last 10 years. And his secretary said he wanted to come to New York to meet with me, to take me out to lunch. And I was very hesitant because I thought he probably just wants a donation, because I never had anything to do with the school because of the way they treated me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but because I confront my fears, I agreed to meet with him. And I said, you know what? The universe is opening up an opportunity for me to tell him what I went through. And I'm going to sit with this man and I'm going to tell him how badly they treated me for those 4 years, that they tried to ruin me as a human being. And so he brought another dean with him, and these two men came to meet with me in New York, and they took me to a beautiful restaurant. And I started to tell him my story of how badly I was treated. And he stopped me and he said, I want you to know that the men who ran the school in those days, they were racist and anti-Semites.
Mm.
And that's why you were treated that way, because of my Jewish background. And I said to him, I thank you so much for saying that I didn't have to say it, that he said it to me, because that was always on my mind. I always thought that, because one of the guys had a Confederate flag in his office and a sign that said, the South will rise again. And he's the guy that banned me, and he made me come to his office wearing my wig, and he made me turn in a circle. He didn't know it was a wig. That's how stupid he was. He thought I had gotten a haircut. He just wanted my hair to be flat over to the side with a part.
Yeah.
And then he said, he made me turn in a circle, and then he said, okay, now you could go back into the clinic. And because my dad had been in World War II, my dad was in the OSS.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, your dad served us well in World War II. That was his words. And that's why he let me back in the clinic. And as I said, so this new dean invited me to come. He goes, I want to send a car for you, and I want you to come down to Philly, and I want you to see how we've changed the school. He goes, because I would never allow that to happen anymore. We have a different environment. And I took pictures with these two deans, which was hilarious. And then the pandemic hit. I never got to go, but online, he had me do 5 weekly lectures to the doctors on my techniques of thought about my books. He said, I want you to lecture to the doctors on how to change frustration to enjoyable and from hate to love. And he said to me, can you ever believe that this would happen in your life? I said, in a million years, I would never think that the dean of the school that punished me that way, that treated me that way, would invite me back so many years later. And then he hired me to do a comedy show for them, for the doctors and the students and the staff for Christmas. And we did 2 days, a big comedy show on 2 nights.
Okay.
And I said, it's a great lesson. It just shows you that you never know what's going to happen in your life, you know? So I'm very grateful for all those things. To me, that's amazing that I would get an opportunity to go back there. And now I'm friends with the dean. I'm friends with the dean and all the people there. They all know me.
Yeah.
And we're in touch. And when things get better, they still want me to come down to the school. They're going to send a car for me. They want me to see how much things have changed. But so it's been a crazy story. My life has been a crazy story. And I think that's why they wound up doing the documentary about me.
Sure.
Because it's like a movie, John.
Oh, yeah.
Like things that I couldn't expect myself. My show on Tuesday is all young stars in comedy that are all friends of mine. And I just call them up and I'm like, would you be on my show? And they're like, absolutely.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know, and it's a great honor to me. And it doesn't even feel real sometimes, you know, that I can walk into any comedy club in New York City and I'm at home. You know, I'm welcome there. I bring in friends. I hang out backstage with the comedians, and it's an interesting ride, John. A very interesting ride. And I know you get it because you have a very eclectic background yourself.
Yeah.
And you know what that's like to transition. You know, I was doing 2 careers at the same time, multiple things. But I know that you're you're a kindred spirit.
I am. Yeah, we got the hair. Hey, Jeffrey, just offhand, I'm a motivational speaker, and I always teach people to write down their goals. I call it a warrior vision list. So the fact that you've been able to conquer your fear so many times throughout your lifetime, even though you've obviously had both physical and mental obstacles, tell me, do you write down your goals?
I have in the past. I've tried everything. I'm open to all positive things.
Yeah.
You know, I keep my mind open. Nobody knows what works and what doesn't work. Manifestation is very important.
Yeah.
I think that there is a power in writing when I work with stutterers. And I want to say that I have a stuttering website for anybody who's watching who knows somebody who stutters. It's called StopStutteringNowGurian.com. Stop Stuttering Now Gurian, Gurian.com. And there are testimonials on there from people that I've helped. You'll see a guy on his first day, and you'll see a guy who's a psychologist that I helped cure his stutter.
Wow.
Who validates my work, because if anybody could question it, it would be a psychologist, because I'm talking about changing thought, and it's all about thought. And for the last 20 years, I've been on the board of a group called the Association for Spirituality and Psychotherapy. And I'm the only non-classically trained psychotherapist, and they accepted my work on thought. So I've presented my work. I have 5-star reviews from psychologists, from psychiatrists, from MDs that I've done radio shows with, who say, how do you know all that? And I'm like, well, a lot of it is intuitive to me. I studied psychology, but I also, I understand people. I understand how the mind works, which is how I was able to cure myself. And so now I just got a patient in South Africa. I work with people in Israel. I work with people all over the world, contact me, who find me. I don't advertise, but people find me on the internet. So the fact that you're a motivational speaker, I consider myself also a motivational speaker. I want to do more of it. That's one of my goals. I want to do a TED Talk.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to manifest that right now. You know, people contact me. During the pandemic year, I've been a guest speaker on multiple conferences about thought. People who have come across my books, they're like, I want you to speak on this. So I've become a so-called thought leader, they call it, you know. But I want to do more, because I want to carry a message to people, a message of hope, that you can change your life and you can change your thinking. And you don't have to be stuck where you are, that you can fulfill your dreams through the power of our mind. Our minds are so powerful. There's no computer that can match our mind, you know. The mind,
absolutely.
And interestingly enough, the heart is more powerful than the brain. So all healing comes from the heart. And that's another thing that I talk about, which is why I call it, I talk about heart wounds and healing your heart. It wasn't just about, like I said, I had the heart attack and was healed from that, but it's about letting go of the things that hold us back and confronting fear. I feel like I confront fear on a daily basis.
Sure.
I confront everything. I don't know why. I was never taught that the world was a safe place. So, and I grew up in a very loving and supportive family. Some people have a very different story. A lot of people grew up in abusive homes. I understand where the fear comes from. With me, it's confusing. I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter why. It's just knowing that I have it, and then I stand up to it. And I say F you to the fear. You know, fear can stand for faith. You know what? I'm blanking on the F everything and run, right? F everything.
That works.
But I look at it as face everything and recover.
Oh, nice. I like it.
Yeah, like fear, you know, and I don't know if you ever heard this. I carry this thing with me every day. If you would let me read this very short thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's from a book, and I call it About Fear, but I use it in all my work. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that others won't feel insecure around you. We were born to manifest the glory within us. It's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And that's from A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson, who I had the pleasure of doing a radio show with. I got to do radio with Wayne Dyer, and I got to meet Deepak Chopra, the leaders in consciousness.
Yeah.
As you achieve these things, John, the last line is so important. You become an inspiration to other people. So there's a lot of stutterers, for instance, who think that they can never get better. They have to go through their whole life stuttering. So now that I've conquered that, I can inspire them to know that there's hope, that you can make a change, that you don't have to go through your whole life. The Serenity Prayer says, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's the most important line, the wisdom to know the difference. If I wasn't given the grace to know the wisdom, that I didn't have to stay stuttering, I'd still be stuttering today. But I understood that I could change that. I don't have to stay that way. Acceptance is for things you can't change. You have to, every single one of us has something about ourselves that we would change if we could. But there are certain things that you have to accept. But there's certain things that you don't have to accept, and that's the key. And so that I use stuttering as an example, but it's a much bigger picture. It's literally about overcoming obstacles in your life, things that you think will hold you back. And you have to say, no, that's not true. That's not valid for me. And you have to examine those thoughts and let them go. And that's what I was able to do in order to accomplish the things that I've been able to accomplish.
Yeah.
With the help of the universe, you could call it nature, God, the universe, whatever you like to call it, as long as you know that there's some higher force that's guiding you. And that's the spiritual nature of what I do. That you can't think that you did it on your own. You did it with help from this higher force, And to me, it's a very comforting thought to understand that. So I hope that answered that question for you about whether I write them. I have very long answers, which you'll notice.
No, that's good. I got one more question I want to get out there. So in my opinion, it's genius to be able to write jokes for somebody like Rodney Dangerfield. And I think you also wrote jokes for Andrew Dice Clay. Is that not correct?
I sure did. I'm one of the few people. Dice actually says it.
Mm-hmm.
He credited me. I'm getting hoarse already. He did an hour, Sirius XM. And within that hour, he shouted me out 3 times. He said, I'm one of the only people that ever wrote for him. And he did my jokes right off the paper. And if I told you the jokes, your show would be off the air.
Yeah.
Dice's material.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But you know what? I think if you're a writer, if you can call yourself a writer, you have to be able to write whatever people need for you. So you asked me earlier how I wrote for such a diverse group. Because I was given the gift of being able to think in their mind. In order to write jokes for somebody, you have to think the way they think. So yeah. I would listen to tapes of theirs, or I would show up at their shows if they were in New York. I would immerse myself in their comedy so I understood them. And then I would write jokes that they would say.
Wow.
And that's just, it's how people write songs. I don't know. It's a gift.
I hear you.
It's a gift that I was given, that I could write in their voice. So the jokes made sense to them and they could say them.
Did you used to get done with doing cosmetic dentistry, like at lunchtime, and you'd be like, oh my God, I got to write this down? Or, you're driving in your car.
Yeah. I would stop in the middle. My nurse had strict instructions. Never interrupt me with a patient unless it's for show business. So she would come in and she'd say, Dr. Rivers is on the phone. Dr. Lewis is calling. Richard Lewis would call me once in a while. The only one no one believed was Dr. Dangerfield. No one
Yeah.
ever believed there was a Dr. Dangerfield. But then I would leave for a minute and I'd take notes, you know. One time the Friars called me.
Uh-huh.
Jim Dale, the Broadway star, was being roasted. And at the last minute, they needed material for him. And I had to run out of my office. It was the only time. I remember I had to leave my office a little bit early and run down to meet with him. He lived on Park Avenue.
Okay.
And we had a great meeting. And I wrote jokes for him that night that they had to do. I think the roast was the next day. This was a long time ago, but I'll never forget. And Gilbert Gottfried, once I had to leave in a snowstorm to do an event with him.
Yeah.
I think I was hosting and he was the star. So there were a lot of funny stories, but I always put my cosmetic dentistry first. It was always very important to me. I had pictures up of the stars that I worked with, and my patients would say, "Are you sure you're in comedy? You're so serious." Because I never wanted anybody to think that I wasn't taking my work seriously. As a doctor, you have to be very serious when you work on your patients. It's a very big honor when people trust you with their health. And nobody wants a doctor that's fooling around all the time. I dislocated my shoulder. It was the worst pain I ever had until I had a kidney stone. But I called my doctor, and I guess somebody had told him to try to make jokes to make patients relax. And he said to me, "Don't make a habit of this." And it didn't hit me well because I was in terrible pain. And after I got better and I had my shoulder reset, I said to him, the time to tell jokes is when people are not in pain, not in the middle of a catastrophe. You don't try to make a joke out of it when someone is. I was literally bent over in pain. And he's like, "Don't make a habit of this."
Right.
So there's a time and place for comedy. You have to know when it fits.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, like you mentioned the term immerse yourself in it in order to create jokes for other people, and that it's a gift. And the difference is there's people out there that have gifts that are not willing to immerse themselves in it. That's one thing I teach is just focus and immerse yourself in it and write down your goals. And you're such a great example of doing just that. I mean, doing the impossible things that most people would believe are incredible or impossible to obtain. You've been able to do multiple, and the universe just keeps bringing you more and more and more to immerse yourself in because you're willing to do it.
And would you believe there are some days when I feel like I haven't done enough, that I want to do more, because I'm always striving. It's never enough.
Yeah.
I'm that A-type personality. I always have dreams. I always have more that I want to do. I feel like one of my purposes is to help people. I did it with cosmetic dentistry, making people look beautiful, making them feel good. As a professor at NYU, I do it with comedy, with my books. I think it's important to try to inspire people. I still have lots of goals, things that I want to do. Like I said, I'm happy that you're a motivational speaker. We need more of those in the world. We need to inspire people.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm about, John. My goal is to always put out positive energy to the universe.
That's awesome. I can wholeheartedly relate. It's so wild when you think about how you spend your spare time. And arbitrarily, I've spent my spare time reading about 100 biographies and watching multiple documentaries, and they tend to be on the entertainment business. So though I've never really professionally been in the entertainment business, I feel like I know a ton because I've spent like the majority of my life reading about it or immersing myself in documentaries about it, and primarily for inspiration and escape. Inspiration because these people have attained the unbelievable, which is what you have to do in my profession, which is sales, make something out of nothing. And then two, the obstacles that they've overcome and the escapism that, like, I have so much knowledge of areas that I've never really been involved in. And it's made learning about your life has made my life more meaningful.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. And I'll tell you on a professional level too, you have a great smile, and that helps a lot. You have good teeth, you have a great smile, and that helps so much.
How I got this great smile? Cosmetic dentistry.
I understand. I get it. I know people respond. Milton Berle used to tell me about how the fortunes of money he was spending on his teeth, but he had a great smile. It's worth it.
It is.
People respond to a great smile.
So this is a quick story, Jeffrey. So when I was in college, a friend of mine, we used to have these things called champagne breakfasts in college, where girls would come over to our dormitory and bring us champagne, completely against the law. And one of my friends came up to me, gave me a hug. As he's giving me a hug, takes the champagne bottle and hits me as hard as you can, like right there on that tooth. And
On purpose?
No, he was just giving me a hug. Like one of these spontaneous things. He gives me a hug. As he's giving me a hug, the champagne bottle just arbitrarily comes up and just boom. And tons of pain. I hadn't yet had very much champagne. And so I proceed to spit a piece of my tooth onto the concrete and some blood. And then I go up and I put my finger in the hole that is now where my tooth used to be. Not the whole tooth. Like I look like Jim Carrey or whatever on that stupid, that movie that he was in. And, but thank God I had a dentist that replaced those teeth for me. And then too, like this down here, these look really good. Hardly anybody has good teeth on the bottom. Mine are all false because when I was like 10 years old. What's that?
No, I said mine aren't, but go ahead.
But you notice, like even famous people, when they get on TV, I always study people's teeth on TV and when they talk. And I remember looking at Al Gore when he was talking. I'm like, those are the most jacked up teeth. As wealthy as I.
It's horrible. A lot of people only pay attention to the teeth that show when they smile, and the rest of the teeth look horrible. And that always. I'm all about cosmetics. That was my specialty. So it's very important. But people respond to that. John, I'm starting to get hoarse.
We can cut out pretty quick, but I just wanted to tell you. So I went to 10 dentists, and every single one of them said they couldn't do my bottom teeth. And how it happened, when I was 10 years old, I was horsing around with a friend of mine, and we were watching a movie with a ton of action in it. And so we were wrestling. I go down on the carpeting. He jumps from the couch on top of me, hits my head into the shag carpeting. My bottom teeth, majority of them just like break off into the shag carpeting. If it wasn't for the fact that we lived right next to a dental, like a orthodontist, he was an orthodontist. He helped wire my teeth a little bit that night before I went to bed and gave me medication so I could sleep because I was in total pain. Got me in his office the next day and wired my teeth, or I never would have been able to get them replaced like they are today.
You really had some terrible stories. 2 times in my career, I had to put teeth back that were what we call avulsed. They were knocked out. One time at Dangerfield's Comedy Club, a man fell down the stairs. As a matter of fact, Rodney's partner reminded me of this story recently. His partner still owned the club until it went out of business. A man fell down the stairs and knocked out his teeth, and I happened to be there that night. And I put his teeth back in. I reimplanted them and saved him from a lawsuit, he said. And then one time, a friend of mine, his son knocked out his teeth. And I was home, and he brought him over. I had no tools. I had nothing. His son was 11 years old and knocked out his permanent teeth. And I held them with my fingers for 2.5 hours until I put them back in. And I held them because I had no wires and no instruments here. And I held them for 2.5 hours until the blood clots held them in place. And they're still there today as an adult. Excuse me. So it was an amazing story. It was my greatest fear. And it also shows you sometimes that you manifest your worst fears. So you have to be careful what you're afraid of. Because if you focus on it too long, you're liable to bring it into your life. Very often, people who are cancer phobic wind up developing cancer. If that's all you think about, you can draw that into your life because Wayne Dyer said it best, and we should end on this maybe. Wayne Dyer, who was so famous and unfortunately left us in recent years. I had the pleasure of being a friend of his and meeting him. He said that if your intention is strong enough, the intention coming from your heart, not only from your mind, that you can manifest things in your life. if you put it out there to the universe and your intention is strong enough. And that's important for people to know. Nobody knows exactly how to do it, but if you focus your energies on something really positive that you want to achieve, that there's a very good chance that you can draw that into your life. And you have to be careful because the opposite works too. So don't dwell on negative things because you're liable to draw that into your life as well. And I think that's a good message.
Yeah.
To maybe end on. I've enjoyed this so much, John.
Oh, yeah. You want to say goodbye to everybody? Okay, so we have had a wonderful guest on today on School's Out 80s Comedy Story Time. So from New York City, we're going to have Jeffrey Gurian say goodbye.
Hey guys, listen, John, it's been so fun being on with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to delve into my eclectic background, my history. This has been great. I look forward to seeing the finished product, and I hope that some of your people will check out my books. I'm going to hold them up again. My happiness books, Fight the Fear and Healing Your Heart by Changing Your Mind, a spiritual and humorous approach to achieving happiness. You know how hard it is to get a dog to sit in lotus position? It's not an easy thing on an orange pillow. And check out my stuttering site, StopStutteringNowGurian.com. My website is ComedyMattersTV.com. Also on YouTube. If you're on Instagram, I'm at Jeffrey Gurian, Gurian. And you can send me an email, Jeffrey at Jeffrey Gurian. I never mind saying that for people who have any questions about stuttering or about comedy or about anything else. I now have a Patreon page that people can join, patreon.com/ComedyMattersTV for people who want to support the channel. I have some very interesting things that I offer. You get my books for free, and you get a chance to have a one-on-one with me on Skype, a personal meeting if you join my Patreon page. Again, it's patreon.com/ComedyMattersTV. So again, I thank you very much, John. It was great to be on with you.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I hope we get to do some fun stuff together again.
Heck yeah, definitely. We'll manifest it, Jeffrey. All righty, and from Dallas, Texas, I'm going to sign off as well. Jeffrey, have a great rest of your day, sir. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, John. And to all my friends in Texas, keep up the good work. You guys are great.
I teach people to authentically sell. And I do it a few different ways. One is with my book on Amazon called Sales Warrior. And two, I can teach you to sell with my course on Teachable called Sales Warrior Module 1. It's an awesome opportunity for you. There's over 5.5 hours of audio and video and worksheets, all designed to inspire you to sell more and to be successful and enjoy and to love life. And again, from Dallas, Texas, just want to sign off and wish you all the best in life.